Hey everyone, so for the last few years I've been using Windows phones, more specifically Nokia's, before Windows actually bought out the phone division from Nokia, and I wanted to do a review about them. As you can see, I have pretty much used both of these phones to absolute death. In fact, neither of them work properly anymore. Collectively between the two I've had them for about 4 years now, maybe even a bit longer. So I haven't actually been sponsored or I haven't been given these or anything like that. These are my own phones that I paid with my own money, and I've had a SIM-only contract with them. So I've bought the handsets outright. So I wanted to basically do a very honest review about these two phones now that I've stopped using them, and obviously of the experience I had whilst using them. First and foremost, I'm just going to say that I bought these, particularly the first one I bought, which is the Nokia 720, and then later the Nokia 625, which is this one here, which is a bit bigger, similar, slightly updated version of this. At the time I bought these, the whole kind of smartphone market was very different. The whole Apple Android duopoly hadn't really evolved just yet, and there were a lot of other competitors still, namely Windows Phone and Blackberries were still quite big at the time. So the reason I originally got this phone here is actually because at the price point of what I had to spend at the time, I was a student and I didn't have a lot of money. For the price point that this was at, which I think was about £100, £99, it was actually quite a good deal in terms of what it offered compared to respective models. Obviously Apple products have never gone down to that kind of price point. It was, you know, already expensive as it is today. It's a premium product, and the comparable Android options to these were actually not very good. Just to give you an idea, my sister had a very early Samsung, same kind of price point, and she actually had to just bin it after not very long. The reason being it was kind of poorly executed overall. I'm not saying all of Samsung's products were bad at that point, but at the lower end they weren't great. Now obviously at that point there were many Android phones on the market, so I can only compare with what I'd seen, but I spent a lot of time reviewing and having a look at websites and kind of decided on this. I'd also had a lot of other Windows products and I kind of like the interoperability with my laptop, etc, etc at the time. All of that being said, I knew when I was buying this phone that it wasn't going to be great in terms of the variety of apps available. Even back then it was obvious that iOS and Android had bigger app stores, but at the time I bought this, the core apps, or what I would define as core apps, were really well managed and well supported basically by Windows and by their respective developers. So I'm talking about very basic things like Facebook, Twitter, various storage apps like Dropbox and that kind of thing. So although it didn't have the breadth of having all the latest stuff, if you perhaps wanted to use things like Tinder or Deliveroo and all these kind of things as they were coming out a few years ago, it was still a kind of relatively solid phone, and that's what I liked about it originally. I kind of also like the real simplicity of its layout and its user interface. The whole Metro tile system that Windows had adopted back then was actually really refreshing, and it was quite clear cut to use. A minor thing which I think is worth mentioning about the Windows phones, compared at least to other operating systems, was that the predictive text was actually really good. It seemed to know what I wanted to write before I wanted to write, and it'd save you a lot of time by being able to actually press on the whole word rather than typing it out or getting the spelling right. I'm not saying that iOS and Android don't do that well, but I found that I'd have to go back and correct things a lot less on Windows Phone. I don't know if it's just the kind of algorithms they use to predict what you're typing, or whether it picks up better on the kind of patterns as you type and kind of learns a bit more. I'm not too sure about that, but I will say it was really good on that. Also worth mentioning that Lumia's and Windows phones as a legacy point from Nokia had really good battery lives, particularly compared to modern smartphones, which tend to be a bit iffy on being able to last, especially with like energy intensive apps. So they were quite good. Nokia had a history of making good batteries, and that did carry over, at least initially. I can't speak for most recent models, but at least in this era they were really good for battery life. So recently my Nokia Lumia 625 gave up on me. It just decided to stop charging and it just kept restarting. It's just time to get a new phone. It did last me 2.5-ish years. I have actually given up on the Windows phones, and this is kind of why I'm making this review. I kind of want to talk about why that is and give you an overall idea of the kind of experience I had with it longer term. I have actually moved on to an iPhone, shock horror. The reasons being as follows. We're in a different place in terms of where phones are now, and in my opinion at least, iOS and Android have really cemented their position as the two main providers of smartphones. Sadly, I don't feel like Windows seem to be that bothered by supporting their Lumia range in a way that is kind of needed. I think they kind of have to be honest, given up on the system. And why do I say that? Well, first and foremost, I feel like core apps, even their own in-house apps like Internet Explorer and various other bits and pieces, just weren't even being supported anymore. To give you an example, Internet Explorer would crash almost any time I tried to open a website that contained something more than text and basic images, which in this day and age is really not good. Most websites will have embedded bits and pieces and it just would crash, to the point where I just got really fed up and stopped using it. Obviously, the other thing to mention here, which will be no surprise to most people, is that the App Store for Windows Phone is very, very limited and really hasn't grown a great deal over the years. It just hasn't really taken off in the developer community in the way that I'm sure Windows would have hoped it had, and I could also hoped it had when I bought my Windows phones. It's a shame because there was promise underneath it all, but I just don't feel like it was ever really pushed, and which is bizarre really, because Windows and Microsoft is a big company that had the resources to do it, but I just don't think it ever invested the time and the right people and talent into getting it off of the ground. I think they got into the game a bit late, having seen what Apple did in the area and obviously what Google did with Android, and I just don't think they really pushed themselves basically. So in summary, I would not recommend Windows phones to anyone, and I'm kind of annoyed that I have done in the past just because of where they've gone. To really round it up, the main issues now are that obviously third-party developers aren't really supporting either their existing apps very well or creating the new ones. So it will always mean that when a new app launches that everyone is on, you'll either have to wait a substantial amount of time to get it on Windows Phone, or it may never come at all. The other major thing with them, sadly, is that even Windows seems to have given up, and a lot of its core functionality just seems to have stopped working altogether. Towards the end of this phone's life, a lot of in-house apps were just crashing on me like every couple of minutes, and they just weren't working as they should. It's a real shame, but it's just the way that it has gone, and to be honest with you, whether one likes it or not, the game is either Apple or one of the Android devices. I know this review wasn't about a specific device or phone, and I can't talk about the absolute most recent Lumia devices just because I haven't actually had much experience with them. But I hope this review was useful to some of you maybe thinking about buying your next phone. Like I said before, I haven't been sponsored, I haven't been given any of these phones, but suffice to say I've had both for a long time, so I've been a quite consistent user of the whole Windows ecosystem. So yeah, I hope that was of some use to somebody, and if you have any questions, I'll do my best to answer them if you want to leave a comment down below. Thanks, and bye guys.